The morning of my wedding, I thought the nerves would be about the dress, the vows, maybe tripping on the aisle. Instead, my phone lit up. We're in Paris. Nobody cares about your little wedding party. I read it twice, thinking I misunderstood. Then my sister's message followed, "Your wedding looks like a circus, Bethany." My chest tightened. Guests were arriving. Music was starting. And I had to decide whether to fall apart or walk anyway. I didn't know yet that was only the beginning. 3 months before the wedding, everything still felt calm enough for me to believe it would all come together. Gently. Not perfectly. Just warmly. The kind of warmth you imagine when you picture your parents sitting in the front row, your sister adjusting your veil, everyone leaning in instead of standing back. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Santa Fe with my laptop open, reading and rereading the message I was about to send. I didn't want it to feel rushed. I didn't want it to sound demanding. I wanted it to feel thoughtful, like an invitation, not an announcement. I wrote about the venue first, describing the soft desert light that settled over the courtyard in the late afternoon. I explained why we chose that specific date, how Mason and I had compared calendars for weeks before it finally felt right. I told them how much it would mean to have them there beside me during the ceremony. I even mentioned the rehearsal dinner and asked Helena if she would be willing to participate in a small part of it. Nothing dramatic, just something simple that would make her feel included. I imagined her teasing me about being sentimental, but secretly appreciating that I'd asked. When I finally hit send, my hands were shaking a little. Not from fear exactly, more from hope. I wanted them to feel how much of my heart was wrapped inside those details. An hour passed before Mom replied. Her message was short, polite. She said the date sounded fine and that they would try to be there. That was it. No questions about the venue, no comment about the rehearsal dinner. No. I'm so happy for you. Just a neutral acknowledgement, like I'd emailed her about a dentist appointment. I told myself she was probably busy. Dad's reply came a few minutes later. He wrote that it was an important milestone and that they would mark it on their calendar. The words looked formal, almost rehearsed. There was no follow-up, no curiosity, no sign that he was picturing me in a dress or wondering how I felt. It felt less like they were receiving an invitation and more like they were checking off a task. Then Helena responded. She said she was busy with work and would see if she could arrange her schedule. That was all. I stared at her message longer than the others. I had expected at least a question, maybe something playful. Maybe a "send me photos of the venue" or "have you found your dress yet?" But there was nothing. No interest in where it would take place, no comment about Mason, no excitement about being asked to take part in the rehearsal dinner. It was strange how something so neutral could sting. There was no cruelty in their replies, no obvious rejection. And maybe that's what made it harder to explain. If they had argued or refused outright, I could have reacted to that. But this felt like being gently placed at arm's length. I tried to brush it off. People get busy, adults have schedules, not everyone expresses excitement the same way. Still, I couldn't ignore the quiet shift inside me. It felt like I was standing in a room with my family, speaking clearly and watching my words dissolve before they reach them. A few days later, I wrote again. I told them more about how meaningful the day was to me. I explained that it wasn't just a ceremony, it was the beginning of a life I hoped to share with them too. I chose every word carefully. I didn't want to sound emotional or needy. I just wanted them to understand that their presence mattered. The responses were similar: brief, controlled, detached. Mom said she understood. Dad said they would do their best. Helena reacted with a simple acknowledgement and changed the subject to something about her workload. I remember putting my phone down and sitting very still. It wasn't dramatic. There was no argument. But the silence between their lines felt heavier than before. I started noticing how little they asked. They didn't inquire about the guest list. They didn't ask how planning was going. They didn't wonder if I was stressed or excited. It felt like I was narrating a milestone in my life to people who were only half listening. And yet, I kept hoping. I told myself families fall into routines. Maybe they weren't good at expressing emotion. Maybe they assumed I didn't need reassurance. Maybe they thought I was fine because I've always been the steady one. I carried that belief like something fragile. Every time I reread our messages, I searched for warmth between the lines, a hidden tone, a subtle sign that they cared more than they were showing. But the space between us kept widening in small, almost invisible ways. I started to feel like an observer in my own family, like I was standing at the edge of a circle I used to belong to, watching conversations happen without quite stepping inside. And still, I refused to let that feeling harden into certainty. This was my wedding. Surely that would matter enough to pull them closer. Surely when the date approached, something would shift. People sometimes wake up when milestones become real. I clung to that thought. 3 months felt like enough time for warmth to grow, enough time for excitement to build, enough time for a mother to ask about her daughter's dress, for a father to wonder what song would play during the first dance, for a sister to tease or complain or show up in some unmistakable way. Instead, what I received was politeness, neutrality, a steady, quiet distance that left me questioning whether I was asking for too much just by wanting them to care. And even then, I convinced myself it would change. Because the alternative, the possibility that they simply didn't feel what I hoped they would, was something I wasn't ready to face. So I kept planning. I kept sending updates. I kept believing that when the day finally came, they would step forward. I just didn't realize yet how much silence can say. 1 week before the wedding, everything should have felt settled. Instead, it felt fragile. Mason and I spent that Monday morning at the dining table papers, spread out between us seating charts, ceremony layouts, final confirmations from vendors. He had this steady patience about him, the kind that made even small decisions feel manageable. We adjusted the seating twice because I kept second-guessing myself. I wanted it to feel right, balanced, thoughtful. He leaned over the chart and asked gently, "Do your parents prefer aisle seats or closer to the center?" The question caught me off guard. Of course they should have a preference. They were the bride's parents. Front row, close enough to see every expression, close enough to matter. "I'll call and ask," I said, trying to keep my voice light. By the afternoon, I finally worked up the nerve to dial Mom. My heart tightened in a way that felt disproportionate to such a simple task. "It was just a seating question. That's all," she answered. But her tone sounded distracted, like I'd interrupted something more important. I explained that the planner needed confirmation about reserved seats. I asked whether she and Dad would prefer aisle placement or somewhere slightly inward for a better view. There was a pause. Not a thoughtful pause, a distant one. "We haven't really discussed it," she said. "Just put us wherever it's convenient." Convenient? The word lingered longer than it should have. I waited for something more, a follow-up question maybe. How are you holding up? We're looking forward to it. Nothing came. I thanked her anyway and ended the call. Maybe Dad would sound different. When he picked up, his voice carried the same cool detachment. I repeated the question, giving him another opportunity to engage, to care, to show even a flicker of investment. Anywhere is fine, he said. Don't stress about it. It was meant to sound reassuring, practical, supportive. But it felt like the ceremony existed somewhere on the edges of his life, not at the center of mine. After I hung up, I stared at the seating chart again. 2 front row chairs neatly labeled. They suddenly felt symbolic. Reserved space for people who seemed emotionally absent long before the day arrived. I told myself I was overthinking it. People express love differently. Not everyone gushes, not everyone asks questions. Still, something in me felt unsettled. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. It was the family group chat. Helena had sent photos. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The images showed a hotel room, tall windows overlooking a city skyline. Then, a close-up of a glossy brochure featuring guided tours. Another photo displayed what looked like a printed itinerary, detailed and organized. Paris. The word wasn't written, but it didn't need to be. The architecture outside the window made it obvious. I stared at the screen, waiting for context, an explanation, a timeline, something that connected these photos to reality. There was none. Mom responded first. The view looks incredible. Dad followed. I've always wanted to visit that district. Their enthusiasm jumped off the screen. Bright, animated, engaged. They commented back and forth with Helena about restaurants and galleries, about neighborhoods they hoped to explore. Their messages carried an excitement I hadn't seen once in any conversation about my wedding. Not once. I scrolled back up to my earlier message about seating arrangements. It still sat there. No reaction, no emoji, no acknowledgement. The contrast felt sharp enough to sting. I tried to reason through it. Maybe the trip was planned for after the wedding. Maybe they were just sharing early excitement. Maybe they assumed I already knew about it. But the dates weren't mentioned. No one clarified departure times. No one said we'll be back before the ceremony. Instead, the thread continued with casual enthusiasm. Hotel details, tourist spots, a joking comment from Helena about pastries. My chest felt tight. I wanted to ask directly, "When are you going? Will you be back in time?" But I hesitated. Why did I feel afraid to ask such a basic question? That realization unsettled me more than the photos themselves. Mason noticed the shift in my expression. He came around the table and looked at my screen. I explained quietly, trying to sound rational. "Maybe it's a surprise," I said. "Maybe they're planning something special and just not talking about it." He didn't dismiss me. He never did. He just listened. "Hope isn't foolish," he said gently. I nodded. But hope was starting to feel fragile. Over the next few days, the silence deepened in subtle ways. Every time I sent an update about the rehearsal timeline, about final dress fittings, the responses were minimal. Sometimes, just a "got it." Sometimes, nothing at all. Yet, beneath Helena's Paris photos, the conversation flourished. Mom asked about museum tickets. Dad joked about cafe hopping. Their excitement had texture when it wasn't about me. That was the part that hurt most. I found myself checking the chat more often than I wanted to admit, watching for signs, searching for any acknowledgement that the wedding was only a week away. None came. At night, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake, replaying our recent exchanges. I tried to convince myself there was no malice in their behavior. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe travel planning felt easier than emotional engagement. Maybe they assumed I didn't need them the way I did. But the distance wasn't imaginary. It was measurable in the length of their replies, in the absence of questions, in the energy they offered everywhere except toward me. One evening I whispered to Mason, "What if they don't come?" The words felt dramatic the moment they left my mouth. "They'll come," he said calmly. "It's your wedding." I wanted to believe that certainty. I clung to it. Because the alternative that they could be excited about Paris while remaining indifferent about my ceremony felt too heavy to carry. And yet as the week narrowed and the date approached, the space between us felt sharper than ever. The wedding was 7 days away. The front row seats were still reserved. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice began asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. When the wedding day finally arrived, I woke up with a fragile kind of optimism. Not confidence, not certainty. Just a thin layer of hope stretched carefully over everything I was afraid to feel. The venue in Santa Fe looked exactly the way I had imagined it. Soft desert lights settling over the courtyard, white chairs aligned in neat rows, flowers catching the morning air. Guests were already beginning to arrive, their voices blending into a warm hum that felt almost comforting. I stepped inside and told myself this was it. Whatever doubts had followed me through the week had to stay outside those doors. People smiled when they saw me. Friends reached for my hands. Someone complimented the dress I had chosen after months of hesitation. Their kindness created a temporary shield around me. For a few minutes, I could pretend nothing was missing. Still, my eyes kept drifting. Small glances at first, toward the entrance, toward the front row. I told myself they might be late. Traffic, a delay, a simple misunderstanding. I clung to every reasonable explanation because the alternative felt too sharp to touch. The coordinator guided me toward the entrance where the ceremony would begin. The music started softly, a signal that everything was in motion. My pulse quickened, but I forced my breathing to stay steady. This was supposed to be the happiest walk of my life. When the guests rose in unison, I stepped forward. The aisle felt longer than I remembered. I smiled the way I had practiced, gentle, composed, grateful. I kept my posture straight, my pace measured. But as I moved closer to the front row, I let my eyes lower. Just enough to see what I had been avoiding. 2 chairs, perfectly arranged, untouched, reserved, empty. The sight stopped something inside me. They weren't just empty seats. They were visible proof of something I had spent months refusing to name. No last-minute arrival, no hurried apology whispered as they slipped into place. Just stillness. A few guests noticed. I could see it in the way their expressions shifted. Subtle glances, questions they didn't dare to ask. The absence hung in the air like a silent announcement. My throat tightened. For a split second, I thought I might freeze right there in the aisle. That I might turn around, retreat into the safety of a room where no one was watching. But then I saw Mason. He was standing at the front, waiting. His eyes searched mine the moment he noticed something change in my expression. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. He already knew. When I reached him, he took my hand with a steadiness that grounded me instantly. The pressure of his grip wasn't dramatic. It was calm, present, real. "You're not alone," it seemed to say. I swallowed the tears that had gathered at the edges of my vision. I refused to let them fall. I had promised myself I wouldn't allow anyone's neglect to ruin the commitment I was making. So I stood there. I listened as the officiant spoke. I repeated my vows, even though each word felt heavier than I expected. Not because they were difficult to say, but because they contrasted so sharply with the silence that had greeted me from my own family. Mason's family sat just a few seats away, their faces glowing with warmth. His mother wiped her eyes openly. His father smiled in a way that felt proud and unguarded. Their presence softened the edges of my disappointment, but it couldn't erase the hollow space carved out by those who were missing. I kept smiling. From the outside, everything looked beautiful. The courtyard shimmered in the afternoon light. The music swelled at exactly the right moments. Guests leaned forward, attentive and supportive. Inside, something was unraveling quietly. It felt like living in two realities at once. One where I was a bride bathed in celebration, and another where I was a daughter scanning a front row that would never fill. When we were pronounced, married applause rose around us. Laughter followed. Someone cheered. I let myself lean into Mason's embrace for a fraction longer than planned, just to steady my breathing. For a moment, I allowed his presence to be the only thing that existed. The reception carried on with its own rhythm. Laughter echoed across the room. Glasses clinked. Music drifted through conversations. I moved from table to table, thanking guests, accepting hugs, posing for photos. I delivered gratitude with practiced grace. Every time someone congratulated me, I responded warmly. I made eye contact. I listened. But there was a constant low ache beneath everything, a question that wouldn't leave. How could they not be here? I found myself imagining what they might be doing instead. I pushed the thought away each time it surfaced. I didn't want speculation. I didn't want to ruin what was left of the evening. Mason stayed close without hovering. He checked in with quiet glances. His hand would brush mine when we crossed paths, a silent reminder that we were building something steady together, even if parts of my past were cracking. His family surrounded us with affection. They filled the room with genuine warmth, the kind that doesn't need to be forced. And yet, even surrounded by kindness, I felt the absence, like a shadow following me from one conversation to the next. During the first dance, I let myself focus only on the music, on the rhythm of our steps, on Mason's reassuring smile. For those few minutes, I almost forgot to look toward the front row. Almost, but the emptiness lingered. It lingered during the speeches, when friends shared stories that made everyone laugh. It lingered when I cut the cake and smiled for photographs. It lingered when guests approached to say how beautiful everything was. I moved through the evening deliberately careful, not to let my composure crack. I wanted the guests to remember the joy. I didn't want their lasting memory to be a bride undone by absence. And yet beneath the music and celebration, I felt a steady hollow expanding. As the night drew closer to its end, the energy in the room softened. Conversation slowed. The dance floor thinned. One by one, guests offered final hugs and well wishes. When the last of them left, the venue felt different, quieter, heavier. The flowers still stood in their arrangements. The candles flickered low. From the outside, nothing looked broken. But inside, I felt the weight of everything I had held back. The empty chairs were gone by then, cleared away like they had never been there. Still, their absence followed me. And as the music faded and the celebration settled into silence, I realized the hardest part of the day hadn't been walking down the aisle alone. It was carrying the question of why. When the last guest left and the reception hall finally emptied, the silence felt different from ordinary exhaustion. It wasn't just the end of a long day. It was the quiet that comes after you've been holding yourself together for hours. I slipped away to the bridal suite because I needed a moment where no one was watching me smile. The flowers were still arranged on the table. My dress felt heavier now, as if the fabric had absorbed every unspoken thought I had swallowed since morning. For the first time all day, I let my shoulders drop. Then I reached for my phone. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A missed flight, a sudden emergency, something unexpected that would make the empty chairs feel less deliberate. I called Mom first. The ringing stretched longer than usual. Each second felt amplified in the quiet room. I stared at the screen, willing her to answer. It went to voicemail. I hung up and immediately tried Dad. The same outcome. Ringing, silence, voicemail. My voice was already trembling by the time I tried again a few minutes later, even though I knew repetition wouldn't change anything. The sound of unanswered ringing became louder each time until it felt like confirmation rather than coincidence. They had not been delayed. They had not been caught in traffic. They were simply not coming. I opened the family group chat, my fingers colder than I expected. I typed carefully, asking where they were and whether something had prevented them from attending. The message showed a scene, no response. That small read receipt landed harder than the empty chairs had. They had looked at my words. They had chosen silence. I stared at the screen long enough for the brightness to sting my eyes, but I refused to look away. Avoiding it would feel like allowing them to pretend nothing had happened. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from my best friend Olivia. "Are you alone?" she asked. Before I could respond, she sent a link. I tapped it without thinking. It opened to Helena's newest post. The first image showed her, smiling in front of a recognizable Paris landmark. Mom and Dad stood behind her, close together, looking relaxed, happy. The caption joked about family adventures and included emojis that radiated celebration. I scrolled. There were more photos, pastries on small cafe tables, gallery interiors, a video clip of them laughing under bright city lights. The timestamps were unmistakable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication. This was a choice. My breath caught in a way that made the room feel smaller. The confusion I had been clinging to all day dissolved in seconds. There was no more space for doubt. They hadn't missed my wedding. They had replaced it. I returned to the family group chat, still trying to process what I had just seen. A new message appeared. Mom wrote, "We're in Paris. Nobody cares about your little wedding party." The words were identical to the ones that had flashed across my screen that morning. Before I could respond, Dad reacted with a heart emoji beneath her message, as if it were a harmless joke. Then Helena added, "Your wedding looked like a circus, Bethany." The cruelty felt deliberate, not impulsive, not emotional, deliberate. Public too, written in a space that was supposed to belong to family. My hand shook as I stared at the screen. In that moment, something shifted inside me. All day I had been trying to piece together explanations, trying to protect them in my own mind, trying to soften the reality of their absence. But their words erased every excuse I had made on their behalf. There was no emergency. No scheduling conflict, no hidden reason. There was only clarity. I didn't respond in the chat. Instead, I opened the screenshot tool. I captured everything. Mom's message, Dad's reaction, Helena's comment, the read receipts beside my unanswered questions. I scrolled to Helena's Paris post and captured that too, the photos, the caption, the timestamps. Each image felt like evidence, not exaggerated, not edited, just factual. I sat down and began to write. My fingers moved slowly at first. I didn't want to sound hysterical. I didn't want to embellish anything. The truth was already heavy enough. I explained that my parents and sister had chosen to vacation in Paris on the day of my wedding. I described the empty seats reserved for them. I included their exact words from the group chat without commentary. No dramatic language, no insults, just facts. I read it twice, then a third time. I tagged all three of them. For a brief second I hesitated, not because I doubted the truth, but because I knew that once it was shared, there would be no going back to quiet confusion. No pretending this was a misunderstanding. Clarity has a cost. I pressed share. The post went live. The room remained silent. The flowers still stood untouched. My wedding dress pooled around me on the couch. I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the table. There was nothing left to ask, nothing left to interpret. For the first time that day, I wasn't guessing at their intentions. I wasn't searching for hidden meaning in polite replies or neutral tones. They had spoken plainly, and so had I. I knew the post would reach people. I just didn't expect it to move the way it did. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, and my phone began vibrating before I even opened my eyes. When I finally reached for it, notifications flooded the screen. Messages, reactions, shares. The numbers kept climbing as I watched, almost detached from it all. People across Santa Fe had read what I wrote. Acquaintances, former classmates, co-workers, even distant relatives. Most of the messages carried the same tone disbelief. Sympathy, quiet outrage. Strangers and familiar names alike told me no bride should stand at the altar, wondering why her parents chose somewhere else to be. They said I deserved better, that I wasn't wrong to tell the truth. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. But the vibration didn't stop. Missed calls began stacking up, all from the same two names. Mom had called 10 times, Dad even more. I listened to the first voicemail with my jaw clenched tight. There was no apology waiting on the other end, no softness, just sharpness. They accused me of humiliating them, of making them look heartless, of turning a private matter into public spectacle. Dad said I had twisted the story. Mom insisted I was being dramatic. The irony pressed against my ribs, while their voices echoed through the speaker. Not once did they mention the empty seats. Not once did they acknowledge what the day had felt like for me. Their anger wasn't about missing my wedding. It was about being exposed. Helena's message followed. Shortly after, she accused me of tarnishing the family name, of exaggerating, of destroying their reputation over what she called a small misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word stayed with me. I didn't respond to any of them. I let the calls ring. I let the messages sit unread. Engaging would only pull me back into the same pattern defending feelings they had never taken seriously. A week later, they asked to meet. We chose a small cafe, neutral ground. When Mom and Dad walked in, the tension arrived with them. They sat across from me with expressions that tried to resemble concern, but their posture felt defensive. guarded. Mom spoke first. She said they deserved a chance to explain. Dad added that the Paris trip had been booked long before the wedding date, that they assumed I would understand, that I didn't need to make it into something bigger. Helena arrived late and slid into the seat beside them as if this were a united front. She said my post had destroyed the family more than their absence ever could. I listened. Every explanation circled back to the same place: how embarrassed they felt, how people were judging them, how I should have handled it privately. No one asked how it felt to walk down the aisle alone. No one acknowledged the messages they sent. When Mom finally said I should apologize for humiliating them, something inside me settled. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. I told them calmly that the issue was never the trip itself. It was the deliberate way they hid it, the way they let me believe they would be there. The silence on the day of the ceremony, the cruelty in their messages afterward. I said that what hurt wasn't Paris. It was the emotional neglect, the pattern of distance, the fact that they only reached out when their reputation was threatened. Their expressions tightened as I spoke, but none of them interrupted. I realized in that moment that I wasn't trying to convince them anymore. I wasn't asking for understanding. I was stating a boundary. I told them I needed distance, that I would not continue relationships that required me to stay silent about my own pain, that I wouldn't accept conditional affection disguised as family obligation. They looked stunned, but they didn't apologize, and that told me everything I needed to know. When I stood up from that table, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, not because the situation was fixed, but because I had finally stopped trying to earn love that was never offered freely. The months after the wedding unfolded quietly, not dramatically, not triumphantly, just quietly. Back in Santa Fe, the light felt softer than it had before. The air seemed wider somehow. Bethany hadn't realized how much of her life had been spent bracing herself, waiting for the next critique, the next comparison, the next subtle reminder that she wasn't quite enough. Without the constant commentary, something inside her began to unclench. Mason noticed it first. He would catch her humming in the kitchen or see her lingering over morning coffee instead of scrolling anxiously through her phone. He never made a big announcement about it. He simply stayed steady, his presence like a hand at the small of her back, reassuring, unshaken. They built small routines together, weekend walks through the plaza, grocery runs that turned into laughter over nothing, evenings where they talked about plans that didn't involve managing anyone else's emotions. The absence of tension felt unfamiliar at first, almost suspicious. Bethany kept expecting a message to land like a stone in her stomach, but it didn't. There were attempts, of course. Apologies framed as misunderstandings, invitations to move forward, but they never included ownership, never included acknowledgement of deliberate concealment, never included the words that mattered. So she kept her boundary. Not loudly, not cruelly, just firmly. Distance, she discovered, wasn't dramatic. It was practical. It was peaceful. Meanwhile, the public response to her post continued to ripple outward. The screenshots had been factual, nothing embellished, nothing exaggerated. People had simply reacted to what they saw, and what they saw unsettled them. Her parents began to feel the shift first. Social invitations slowed, conversations cooled. Friends who had once praised their close family image grew distant. The narrative they'd curated for years, devoted supportive self-sacrificing, no longer aligned with documented evidence. People noticed. Helena felt it differently. Her professional world, so carefully polished, depended on perception. Clients hesitated. Collaborators asked quiet questions. Comments appeared under her content, subtle at first, then less so. Screenshots traveled farther than she anticipated. The contrast between curated elegance and private cruelty was hard to ignore. Bethany didn't celebrate any of it. There was no satisfaction in watching reputations wobble. No thrill in the discomfort that followed. It wasn't revenge, it was simply exposure meeting consequence. The truth, once visible, carried its own weight, if anything. She felt a complicated sadness, not because she regretted speaking up, but because it had come to this at all. Some nights, she would sit on the porch with Mason and think about the version of herself who used to rationalize everything. The one who believed if she just tried harder, was softer, quieter, more understanding, she could earn warmth. That version of her had been exhausted. Now, without the constant negotiation of her worth, she began to rediscover small things she had set aside. Painting again, reading without guilt, laughing without wondering if she was too loud, making choices without rehearsing how they might be criticized. Her confidence didn't return in a dramatic surge. It rebuilt itself brick by brick. Every time she didn't answer a baiting message, every time she chose peace over performance, every time she reminded herself that protecting her well-being wasn't selfish, it was necessary. The space she created allowed clarity to deepen. She could see now that the ache she'd carried for years wasn't about one wedding. It was about a pattern of emotional neglect disguised as preference, about favoritism framed as inevitability, about silence used as control. Boundaries didn't erase that history, but they stopped it from continuing. And in that quiet New Mexico light, surrounded by a community that had shown up when it mattered, Bethany understood something simple. And steady distance was not punishment. It was self-preservation. For the first time in a long time, the quiet felt like safety. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that love without respect will always feel incomplete. I used to think endurance proved devotion. Now I know peace is the real proof of self-worth. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors we choose when we're ready to stop shrinking. If any part of this feels familiar, you're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I hope you'll stay close for the stories we're still learning to tell.